Hey, this is Chad of Drawn and Cornered. It is August 31st, 2021. It is the final day, the deadline we had for getting out of Afghanistan. All of that occurred yesterday. The final military flight out of Kabul occurred. There's video of the plane taking off. The General McKenzie of U.S. CENTCOM said that we were not able to get out. Everybody we wanted to get out, which I think beggars the question, then why are we getting out? What is the reason that we are getting out? And I think the answer to that is telling about why we were doing this process and why it was so messed up to begin with. And ultimately, it's because Joe Biden set an arbitrary deadline for when we had to get out, and decided that he was going to hit this deadline regardless of what the issues around that were. And I think it's interesting to put this in an analogy, something that you can remember. If you say to your spouse, hey, we're leaving at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is when we're going to be leaving this party, and that's our hard line. Well, if you don't have all your kids at 9:01, you don't leave the party. That was your target. You get everybody assembled that you have to get out, especially knowing that when you leave this party, your kids have nobody to watch over them. None of the adults are responsible or any good, and there's death and dismemberment all around. You're not going to leave your kids at that party because you're going to go, oh, hey, yes, I said 9 o'clock, but 9 o'clock doesn't actually mean anything. That was just our target. So we'll take whatever time is necessary to be able to get those kids out of there and take them with us. But that's not what we did. We left them there. There are Americans on the ground there. There are tons of Afghan allies on the ground there, and their lives get monumentally worse since we're leaving. And because we're leaving, we also are taking an enormous amount of the press capability with us. So what happens now in Afghanistan is going to be largely unknown, or at least unknowable to us. And I think the Joe Biden administration is okay with that. And I think that's damning, and it should be damning for a long time because of the reasons why they made that choice. And we had another report yesterday that apparently the Taliban, as the Afghan government was falling, which supposedly nobody knew about but was also inevitable. Remember that distinction. The administration, it was inevitable, but nobody knew it was coming. It was a surprise. As that government was falling, the Taliban offered us Kabul, said, you guys can secure Kabul, and that way you'll be able to get all your people out, and it's something you guys can control. Or you have to allow us to control it, and we have to be the ones that'll be doing security. And the Biden administration said, you guys take it. We don't want it. We're going to take care of the embassy and maybe one airport. And we duffed both of those operations as well. This is, again, what speaks to the difference between whether or not we should be getting out of the country and how we got out of the country. I think a very solid argument could be made for not getting out of the country, period. But even if I were to cede that point, getting out of the country in this manner has been flawed and flubbed since the minute we got started. And it's entirely because of Joe Biden and the choices that he made to try and make this a political move, to be able to say that the war is over by September 11th, and another arbitrary deadline that symbolically I don't think even says what he wants it to say. It seems much more like a win for the enemies than it does for a win for America. I don't know why that date was chosen. I don't know why he has settled upon that. I'm terrified for what September 11th looks like, and whether or not he's going to try and take a victory lap on something like this. That seems absurd, but I don't think it seems unlikely either. Over the weekend, we also had a moment that, again, it only really suffers from the comparison to the previous administration and all of the flack that Trump took for being uncaring and unempathetic and only worried about himself. We had Joe Biden at Dover Air Force Base taking the remains of the 13 service members in and the official handover back to the States. And we saw him checking his watch. And I'm sure it was a totally innocuous thing, but checking your watch while you're sitting there waiting for service members to come home that died on your watch, and I would argue even further, because of choices that you specifically made about the safety and coordination of the exfil. Where you want to put that responsibility, I think, is irrelevant. It's either slightly because of him or significantly because of him. But on that tarmac, he's checking his watch because he's been out there too long or he's got other things to do. That speaks to the empathetic president that we were supposed to be getting. That was the thing that Joe Biden was. He was the empathetic president, which is a terrible thing to look for in a president, doesn't deal with policy well, but that's what we were looking for, and apparently even that doesn't exist. Further that, he was at a press conference dealing with Hurricane Ida and everything that was going on down there and FEMA's response and blah, blah, blah. First question asked by a reporter was, hey, I want to ask about Afghanistan as we're closing down these waking hours. Joe Biden throws up his hand, says, I'm not talking about Afghanistan, and turns away from the reporter, walking away. Again, tell me what would happen if Trump had done that. Tell me what would have happened if Trump had just blatantly ignored a completely valid, very pressing question, as we only had a couple of days left to worry about evacuating Americans out there, and he just turned his back and walked away from reporters. It would not have ended. The news cycle would have been filled with it, and it should have been filled with it. That is a completely reasonable question. The American people want to know, yes, I get that you're here for a hurricane, but the hurricane is not as vitally important as the choices you're making right now with 2 days left to evacuate Americans. It's absurd on its face. It's absurd on its optics. It's very telling of how Joe Biden is handling the military, how it's handling the press right now, how it's handling the evacuations in Afghanistan or the previous evacuations in Afghanistan. It's a total bungle. And their hope is that we as the American people forget about it. The press gives him cover for it, which they are starting to. You're seeing a lot of op-ed pieces talking about how this was screwed from the beginning. Nothing Joe Biden could have done could have helped it at all. It was all an inevitability. This is just the way that bad things always go down, and disregarding every decision that Joe Biden has made since early April when it comes to how this withdrawal was going to occur. And it's shameful, frankly. It's party politics, it's ideologuing, and it discounts the credibility of anybody who's willing to try and make that point. And I think you will see a harsh divide under people who are trying to make that point too strongly. This is Chad, drawn and cornered. I don't believe that this is a good day, and I apologize for bringing the news to you in this way, but hopefully Afghanistan goes well from this point on. The problem is that at this point, the Americans aren't going to be forgotten there. They're going to have to go through diplomatic ties, and all that means is that on top of all of the military gear that we gave the Taliban, now we're going to have to start giving them enormous amounts of money and stations in international politics that we wouldn't otherwise have had to give them if we could have gotten our people out on their own. They are hostages now to a government that is willing to take anything they possibly can from us in order to secure their release, and we will give it to them because Joe Biden cannot have bad news cycles on his watch because there's too many of them to begin with. So again, this is Chad with Drawn and Cornered. Thank you very much for coming for the news. Check out down below if you have any comments, anything you want to say. Subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing daily reports here. And thank you very much for showing up. See you tomorrow.